Well, good morning to everyone. I am Deacon Jim Cummings. I am from the San Fernando Valley, California chapter, one of the few California chapters, here to welcome you to this workshop and to introduce to you our presenter for this workshop, the Reverend Kori Pacyniak. And they minister here in San Diego, so this is quite a treat to have a local minister here to present to us. And of course, the title of the workshop this morning is Transfigured and Transformed, Church Beyond the Binary. And you've been able to read in the program what I find to be quite an impressive academic training and experience. I mean, Harvard theology, divinity school, and earning your PhD, working on that. We are very privileged to be able to hear the Reverend Kori present with us and dialogue with us. This is being recorded this morning, and we will record the presentation part, but then any Q&A discussion will stop the recording at that point. And I will let Reverend Kori get on with their presentation.
Thank you, Jim. So as Jim mentioned, I'm Koris Background. I pastor a community here in San Diego called Mary Magdalene Apostle Catholic Community. We were founded by a canonical Roman Catholic priest and a Roman Catholic woman priest. And so we exist outside of official church hierarchy, although we're on semi-friendly terms with our current bishop as much as we can be, as much as he's allowed to be, I would say. So that's really been a blessing considering past bishops and other RCLDP communities. Also, I'm doing my PhD in religious studies and gender at University of California, Riverside. My dissertation that I'm currently deep in is on transgender Catholics and their lived religious experience. But today, we will talk a little bit about trans Catholics, but primarily I want us to think about the binary and how we get beyond that. And I want to start with a sonnet for Transfiguration by Malcolm Guite. For that one moment, in and out of time, on that one mountain where all moments meet, the daily veil that covers the sublime, in darkling glass, fell dazzled at his feet. There were no angels full of eyes and wings, just living glory, full of truth and grace. The love that dances at the heart of things shone out upon us from a human face. And to that light, the light in us leaped up. We felt it quicken somewhere deep within. A sudden blaze of long extinguished hope, troubled and tingled through the tender skin. Nor can this blackened sky, this darkened scar, eclipse that glimpse of how things really are. So I start with that, not just because the theme of the conference is Transfigured and Transformed, that's part of it, but it's a sonnet that I used in a sermon on the Transfiguration several years back, and in prepping for this workshop, it popped up, and I was like, oh, I want this. We live in a world divided and ordered by binaries. Most people are assigned one of two genders at birth, sometimes before. The first thing someone asks when someone is pregnant is, what is it? What are you having? My favorite response is, well, hopefully a human, or an alien, a dinosaur, right? One of my nephews really wanted their younger sibling to be a dinosaur. It didn't happen. We're not quite there yet in terms of science. But that shows us just how ingrained these ideas of binary and binary orders are in our society. Some of us exist outside of that binary gender system simply by our being. Some of us get pushed outside it, or get exiled outside it, or take our exodus outside of the binary. I want us to think about these two terms, exile and exodus, in relationship to binaries. When we talk about exile, we think of people who get pushed out. thrown out, perhaps, rejected. Many of us have probably been exiled from churches, potentially from families of origin, potentially from workplaces, from friends groups. We don't always have the power in exile. If you think about Exodus, the power shifts. Exodus refers more to a journey. We are the ones who leave. In our Bible stories, the Exodus refers to these journeys of wandering through the wilderness, through the desert, in which the people are transformed, in which they go deeper into the heart of God, in which they take the holy with them and become transformed. Something happens in that wilderness. Something happens in that Exodus that perhaps could not have happened where they were before. Within Christianity, we tend to talk about two binaries, or we identify ourselves as one of two things: Catholic or Protestant. If we think about our Catholic history and theology, the Roman Catholic Church is the one true church. We trace our apostolic succession to St. Peter. Upon this rock I shall build my church. Everyone else got it wrong, right? Protestant Reformation, you know. If you ask the Orthodox, they will say that we left them and that they have that original claim. If you ask the Anglicans, they will say this whole Catholic versus Protestant thing is silly because they are both Catholic and Protestant. If you ask some of my students at the beginning of the semester, they will say, well, I'm not a Christian, I'm Catholic. And I'm like, oh, all right, we're gonna do Religion 101 here. Someone failed you in CCD, child. I would like to write to your priest and your bishop. There's this idea, this sense, this lack of religious literacy as well in our society, that this is the only divide, and that Catholics means only Roman Catholic. Rome has not trademarked the use of the word Catholic, nor can they. But to be Roman Catholic, is that different than being Catholic? Julie Byrne writes a wonderful book called The Other Catholics that talks about the history of some of the independent Catholic churches in the States. When she draws her little genealogy of Catholic and Protestant, under Catholic are the Orthodox, the Romans, Eastern Rite Catholics, the Anglicans, and then all the independent movements as well. Catholic becomes a lot broader than just Rome. How do we define Catholic? Does it require us signing some statement of belief? Does it require us having gone through certain sacraments? What does it mean to be Catholic? In 2015, the Pew survey found that 58% of American Catholics said that they left the church at some point in time. 28% of those identified as ex-Catholics at the time of the survey. If you've talked to Catholics, you'll know that many of them tend to put a word before Catholic, whether it's ex, lapsed, recovering, cafeteria, Christmas and Easter. Am I missing any other people?
APEC. Ash Wednesday, Palm Sunday, Easter, and Christmas.
Oh, I have not heard that one.
APEC. My sister's an APEC Catholic.
And Ash Wednesdays, people always show up on Ash Wednesday. I'm like, it's not a holy day of obligation. They're like, but I have to. How else will people know I'm Catholic? I was like,
Yeah.
But yeah, I've also sometimes people put things on the end of Catholic, right? You know, oh, well, you know, there's small c Catholic, there's air quotes Catholic, there's a Catholic when I'm home with my family, there's, well, Catholic but only because I want to get married in the church, or because I want my kids to go through the sacraments, right? So I go as much as I need to for them to get baptized and confirm so they could get married in the Catholic Church, right? We have this very strange relationship with the word Catholic. And yet something about it keeps calling us back. There's a reason we're all here at Dignity at this Catholic conference and not in some other denomination, right? If you're friends with a lot of Episcopalians, they might say, oh, well, come join us because we're just Catholic light. Catholic without the Pope, right? Sounds very attractive. There are a couple more differences in that, but there's this idea that why does the word Catholic still persist as a marker of identity? For some people, it's tied into culture. For some, it's tied into tradition. There's become this idea that something about that has a hold on you that you don't want to give up. I know atheist Catholics who want nothing to do with it, still buy saints' candles, still cross themselves when they pass a cemetery, and still wear medals around their neck. I'm like, well, I really?
I got a kid.
And you're kind of just like, oh, but what? It's, you can't decide what someone else's religion is for them, right? One of my professors once said that to put an identity upon anyone is to colonize them. So if I say that you are Catholic or you are not a Catholic, then I play the role of colonizer, deciding whether or not you fit into which role. But when we get to choose that, when we refuse to let someone else define whether or not we're Catholic, a lot more opens up. So I want us to think about what possibilities open up when we imagine church beyond the binaries. If we step outside of this Catholic-Protestant divide, we step outside Roman or non-Roman Catholic, if we step outside this very strict demarcation of a binary gender system, what opens up? And this is where I want to bring up that idea of exile or exodus again. Because some of us have been exiled from the church. It may have been a rough process. It may have been they don't know. Personally, I'm still waiting for my letter of excommunication to come from the Vatican. It hasn't, that's all right. Francis has a lot to do. That's okay, But I would like to hang it up though, right next to my diploma. But what if we take that Catholic spirit, that thing that keeps us coming back, and we take the church on an exodus? What if we take the church outside the institution? What happens then?
Do it every Sunday.
So do we.
I mean,
They pay my check.
Yeah.
It's a good life. When I think of what the church has the possibility to be, I think of the borderlands and the margins. Because the churches that have plenty of people that don't have to worry about closing, those I'm not worried about. They will always exist. They will always have money to put in their Sunday offering. I want to think about the people that feel that they don't fit in those churches. The people who have been told that their very existence is an abomination. People who have been told that they don't exist because non-binary is clearly, as Cecilia mentioned. The people who have been told that they're going to hell. Those people are no less Catholic than the ones who adhere to every single point of doctrine and are in those crowded churches. So how do we meet those people? How do we serve those people? I think a lot of us probably already do. I think we found those people among our friends. For me, those places on the margins or the borderlands of the institutional church are where amazing things happen. When you get a little bit outside of the bishop's control, when you're willing to break some of the rules, when you're willing to step outside of what is comfortable in order to explore what is possible. I've seen this happen in small faith communities. I've seen this happen at college chaplaincies, as long as they weren't at a Catholic university. I've seen it happen in Dignity chapters, in RCWP and independent churches, right? Often small. The level of engagement that people have with their faith in those communities will put a lot of those big mega Catholic churches to shame. Because there's something there that keeps those people coming back. We say in our community at Mary Magdalene, we say, no one is here because they have to be here, right? It's not that your grandparents went here. We're only 17 years old as a community. It's not that, oh, my children need to be baptized so they can get married. our baptisms use a Trinitarian formula, but sometimes the Catholic Church acknowledges them, sometimes they don't, depending. We have a very official looking certificate. And my name is gender neutral enough that people don't flinch. I send letters of, yes, this person is a good Catholic and good standing. People say, okay, Reverend, that sounds great. I'm like, wonderful. So when people choose to come, not out of any sense of Sunday obligation, not out of any sense of familial responsibility, because they want to be there, I think there's a little more freedom to do something new. I think within these movements is where we see people claiming the word Catholic for themselves and not letting Rome decide who gets to be a Catholic or who gets to use that word. When we step outside that binary of Rome and not Rome, when we sort of just are willing to exist in this nebulous both and sort of place, I think we create opportunities for flourishing. And I use flourishing because I hate the word tolerance. I tolerate olives. If I had my way, I would never eat olives. And I would give them all to my best friend, and she can eat all the olives in the world for me. This is what we do when we travel in Italy. I don't want to be tolerated in a church. I want to be affirmed. I want a place where I can flourish, where my queerness and my transness is seen as a gift and not simply as, oh, well, I guess that's okay, or we have to love everybody. I think when you don't have to follow the rules, a lot opens up. But taking that step to not follow the rules can be terrifying. It can also be liberating. I think sometimes you can do this within the institution, in small pockets, if your bishop isn't too nosy or too controlling. For me, it wasn't possible. As someone who's queer, trans, and called to ordination, it was made very clear to me that there was not a place for me in the Catholic Church if I wanted to minister and use those gifts. If I wanted to sit in the back, oh sure, all of these churches had really great LGBTQ groups. And I said, okay, great, so here's my theology degree. Can I teach Sunday school? No. Can I lecture? Have you ever minister? Well, no one really wanted to say no, they just didn't want to say yes either, right? I was told that church communities weren't ready for me. I was like, well, that's funny. I'm ready for me. I was told that, well, the bishop might not approve. Can't argue with that one. Not all bishops approve of me as it is. But so for me, that path took me first to the Episcopal Church, and then back to sort of the Roman Catholic women priest movement, and now in this nebulous borderland margin area, liminal space that I just call, well, Catholic. And it doesn't matter whether someone says, oh, but clearly you're not Roman Catholic. I'm like, did I say I was Roman Catholic? I'm not claiming to be a Catholic in good standing with Rome. I know the Vatican and I disagree on many, many things, but I'm still Catholic. I don't feel the need to put independent in front of it at the moment. Just put me in that big Catholic umbrella. It's like the big queer umbrella in my mind, It's like to be there without having to worry too much about those labels or those boxes. One of the things that we've seen a lot of in media in the recent years is stories about greater queer and trans inclusion in the Catholic Church, right? So we've had Jim Martin writing some really great stuff. We've had stories of nuns who minister to trans folks, all really great stuff. And I do not want to say there's anything wrong with that. What I see though, as a trans Catholic, is stories of cis people ministering to trans people. I hear about ministry to queer people. I don't really want to read any more stories about ministry to queer and trans Catholics. I want to read stories about ministry by and with queer and trans Catholics. I want those stories of the trans lectors, the trans CCD teachers, the folks for whom their gender and their sexuality supports and strengthens their faith and isn't something to simply be tolerated.
Amen.
Amen.
And this is scary because most churches aren't willing to take that risk. We've seen what happened in Massachusetts when a pride flag was flown at a Catholic school and a Black Lives Matter flag was flown. And they said, well, you can't call yourself Catholic. And I'm like, well, who are you to say they can't call themselves Catholic? The God I know, the faith that raised me, is one that affirms everyone in all the beauty of creation. Because I'm pretty sure a God that is beyond our comprehension can create people in genders that are beyond our comprehension. And I want to take this back to the idea of the Transfiguration. Because when we talk about going outside the binary, it seems very scary. When we talk about going beyond the institution, it seems scary. When I came out as trans, it was terrifying. The Transfiguration is one of those stories that also starts with a moment of fear and terror. Because the disciples are terrified in that moment when they go up on the mountaintop. And Jesus transforms the fear of the disciples. And when he does that, the disciples are like, oh, this is wonderful. Our fear is gone, and now there's this glorious moment, and can we stay here forever? Can we build you tents? Can we stay on this mountaintop with all the glory of God so visible forever? We know the story. The disciples don't get to stay on the mountaintop. Neither do we get to stay on the mountaintop. For me, that mountaintop is those moments when we are completely affirmed in our faith and our gender and our sexuality. Those moments at conferences, in small faith groups, at Pride, wherever you find that place that affirms you, that makes you feel loved and known, makes you feel like you're home. Perhaps not the home that raised you, but a sense of home that loves you and knows you. When the disciples are on the mountaintop during the Transfiguration, part of that transformation happens by Jesus inviting them into the cloud. It's another one of those scary unknown things where you have to go on faith alone. We don't know what's going to happen in that cloud. It might require us leaving that mountaintop of safety and affirmation to do some of that difficult work in the valleys, on the borderlands, and on the margins. It becomes that messy reality of faith and life where the binaries don't quite hold up. When you realize that someone might be a Protestant but says a Hail Mary an awful lot because they learned it from their Catholic grandmother. It might be that place where someone learns that they exist beyond, that the gender binary doesn't work for them, but they don't know what does. And they feel lost in this unknown middle space without anything to cling to, trying to navigate a system that wants that M or F on every single piece of paper. I'm lucky enough to live in a state where I have another option, where all of my identification can now say X. But if I move to certain states, that won't be the case. So
Not my state.
it makes things a little messy. But I think that mess, that borderland, that margin where these binaries don't quite hold up, is where that many of us are called to be. And while the borderlands can be a place of terror and danger that are very real, it can also be a place of transformation and revelation. The theologian William Countryman wrote that Jesus Christ is the very border country in which our human priesthood is lived out. So he writes this in a book called Living on the Border of the Holy, where he goes into this whole borderland thing more. But if we think about that, as Jesus being that border country in which our human priesthood is lived out, because Jesus didn't really care for those binaries, right? Whatever rules were there, he kind of said, that's nice. I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to meet people where they are. I'm going to disrupt the order of society in order to serve the people. I think when we go beyond the binary, when we go beyond the institution, a lot opens up. We then have the potential to see what is possible. We have the potential to create Eucharistic communities where people of all genders can be ordained. People of all genders and sexualities can preach. We don't need clergy to preach. We can have lay preaching, we can have trans lectors, we can have trans CCD teachers. We can create rituals for those moments in life that the church doesn't necessarily think are worth celebrating. And I'm not just talking about queer weddings, as wonderful as they are. You know, in 2022, we now can find a lot of ministers who are willing to officiate queer weddings. But what's still a little bit lacking are the people who are willing or able to give a blessing for transition, a blessing for top surgery, for HRT, the rite of renaming, when you want to be acknowledged in that very sacred space where you were named as a child at baptism. And you want your church and faith community to say, yes, we affirm, we see and recognize this new name of yours and affirm it. And I tend to not be on the rebaptism side for some somewhat conservative theological reasons, but there's nothing to say that we have to limit these rituals and liturgies to what's prescribed by the church. We can create new ones. What I don't want to do is insert queer and stir, right? I think there's a lot of beauty to the liturgies and traditions that have been handed down through our church's history. And there's also a lot of beauty beyond them. And the first time I got asked to write a prayer for someone's HRT shot, I was like, I have no idea what to do. Because writing freeform prayers is not something I was taught to do as a Catholic. I was told to recite. That's what I learned how to do. But to take away that crutch was terrifying. But it also allowed me to think about prayer in a different way. Because what was the point of that blessing? What were we trying to do? Recognize God's presence in that moment of transition, to see how this works and not separate it from the faith community. So I want us to think about what are the borders that we see in our lives, whether they're our regular lives or our church and faith lives. Are they liberating or are they restricting? Because sometimes we like borders and binaries. It makes it easier for us to define ourselves, right? I can say, I'm this, I'm not that. It's nice to know where we stand. But when you're not either thing, the whole system starts to fall apart. But it also opens up a new possibility. Possibilities for more gender creativity if we're talking about the gender binary. Possibilities for new ways of being and doing church if we're thinking about church structures. If we recognize where those borders are in our lives, and we ask where we feel called to, is God calling us beyond that border? Is God calling us off the mountaintop, through the cloud, into something new, something we can't even dream of yet? What's stopping you? I know for me, I'll hear God's call. And I'll be like, that's nice, please pause, thank you, and go on my life, right? Because whatever God's calling me to do is usually big and scary, or at least it appears so to me. So what's stopping you? What do you need? What would help you go beyond that institutional line, beyond that binary, to create something new? When we look at church communities that have sprung up, we can see a lot of potential, and they're hard to sustain, right? We all know how progressive church movements aren't necessarily where they were right after Vatican II, right? How do we pass this from generation to generation? But I think just because things don't look like success in our minds doesn't mean they're not successful. My undergrad college chaplaincy was at a private university, and we had the benefit there of not being really under the bishop's hand. We had a lay Catholic woman as a chaplain, And the bishop didn't really bother. Maybe once every 5 or 10 years, we got a little slap on the wrist for something, but that was about it. This meant that there were female acolytes, there were students who were clearly not ordained preaching the gospel, there were students giving homilies occasionally, reflections, I guess is what we were allowed to call them, right? We had a couple of Jesuits who would come to say Mass who would just sort of put students in the role of the deacon. No ordination required. Just well, I don't have a deacon, you're here, so why not? God calls us to those moments to break down walls and binaries, and that's where transformation happens. And the first time as a student that I got asked to sing the Exalted, I was terrified because I do not sing. And the organist turned to me and said, neither do most Catholic priests or deacons. It's written in, like 5 notes. Pretty much anyone can sing it. We'll practice, you'll be fine. I was 22 years old when I sang the Exalted in my college chaplaincy. It was an amazing, transformative experience. One that would never have happened in a canonical Catholic church. It can be scary to start something new. It can be scary to leave that comfortable, safe place of, I know where I fit within this binary. I know where I fit within this structure, within this institution. But what are the possibilities outside of it? Who is already pushed outside of that institution and unable to come in? What can you offer each of them? To close, I want us to think about how we can take the church. I don't necessarily mean the institution, because we know that the church, the institution of the church changes at a glacial pace. Here in San Diego, we say it's like turning an aircraft carrier, because that is our frame of reference. They move very slowly.
Hey, look how long it took for them to get Galileo back in excommunication.
Exactly. Joan of Arc as well,
Yeah, so
Things take a lot of time, a lot of committees, a lot of discussion. But the church isn't just the institution. The church is those faith communities that keep you coming back. That thing that keeps you calling yourself Catholic. How can you take that church on exodus to transformation? How can you take it to somewhere new and allow the potential to grow into something that you don't have control over, but that might be truly beneficial, where people can flourish?